stars hung like cold watchfires over the fracture line between empires. Along that invisible seam, where mapped space and pride collide, two armadas breathed in the dark. Human carriers drifted in measured formation, holes lit by the soft pulse of navigation beacons. Opposite them, the Valorian battle crescents curled like blades of moonlight, silent and patient. Between both walls of steel, a narrow stretch of nothing, and inside that nothing, the ache of 1,000 unspoken decisions. News of the border clash traveled faster than any courier, a patrol gone wrong, a warning ignored, then debris and names and rage. On human channels, the fallen were honored as guardians. In Valorian halls, the dead were wrapped in silver cloth and remembered with music that rose like smoke. Each side had maps, testimony, righteous certainty. Each side had mothers who did not sleep. On the evening her council assembled to choose a path. Queen Thalira Valis climbed the wind stairs to the highest balcony of the palace. Below, the city stretched in terraces of white stone and flowing glass, built to catch light, as if light were a harvest. Above, the sky was not a sky, but the velvet hush of a planet-sized dome. An artillery shield shimmered faintly overhead, a promise and a threat. Thalira rested a hand on the rail and tried to feel the stone's memory. Valor had been carved into these foundations long before she was born. Strength tasted like salt on the tongue of history. She had been taught to carry it without letting it spill. Her height made people expect thunder, yet her power was in restraint, in silence that turned an audience's heartbeat into a metronome. Her skin bore the faint opalescent tracery of her bloodline lines that glowed gently when she was calm and flared when she was not. Tonight, they held a steady, solemn light. There would be no tears in front of the elders, no tremor in her voice. The weight of her world dwelled in the bones of her back like a second spine, and she stood straight, across the fracture line, on a human forward base lashed to an asteroid. Elias Ward waited for orders that would not come clean. He cleaned his rifle the way some men pray slow, careful, saying names in his head. He had been written up 3 times for reckless deviation. That was the official term. The unofficial term was that he ran toward fire when it came from the wrong direction. Twice he had broken from his unit to carry out civilians. The maps did not mention. Once he had placed his body across a doorway and told an enemy child not to be afraid while the room shook around them. Good soldiers, his captain said, follow the plan. Good men, Elias replied, change it when the plan forgets people. He was not tall, not important, not the kind of man picked to stand near banners in the photographs that history keeps. He wore his hair short because dust gets everywhere. His eyes held the weather of open places. When he smiled, which was rare these days, it made someone else less lonely. He could read a street in one glance where water pooled in storms, where families hid small treasures, which windows would open if you knocked at the right time. After the border clash, he could not sleep without hearing bolts in the hall sing, high with tension. Somewhere a boy was missing a father, a girl, a mother, and nothing in the world, no medal. No speech felt sufficient. The council chamber of the Valorian palace was an echoing amphitheater cut from a single crystal mountain. Elders wore mantles embroidered with star maps of battles won and battles wisely avoided. The queen entered with measured steps, head bare, hands empty. That last detail murmured through the room. A ruler without staff or blade offers only herself, and the elders mark it. Your Majesty, said First Elder Soreth, his voice deep enough to shake dust. The armadas stand within striking range. Our scouts say the humans harden their perimeter. One wrong toe, and we dance on knives. Thalira inclined her head. Then let us not step blind. A debate swelled. Courteous words shaped around hard edges. Some demanded retaliation, precision strikes, overwhelming and final. Others counseled caution, noting how wars eat and never grow full. They spoke of supply lines and orbital trajectories of grain ships and medicine, of songs that children learn in wartime and should never learn at all. Thalira listened. She asked questions that pierced softly and found the bones beneath arguments. When the room fell quiet, she lifted her gaze to the ring of faces and said, "There is an older path." The older path had a name that carried dust from centuries, the Warbride Treaty. Once, when valor was only a cluster of burning cities, a queen put down her spear and took the hand of a rival warlord. The bond held long enough for their children to forget the taste of ash. The ancient statutes lay sleeping in the legal vaults, but not dead. Soreth's brow furrowed, others whispered. To invoke it now would mean binding the queen herself too. Someone drawn from the ranks of their enemies, publicly and irrevocably, as a living pledge that the two worlds could share breath without poison. Who would be worthy? A matron asked, the silk of her mantle sighing as she turned. A human admiral, an envoy with planets in his eyes. They will send their sweetest blade, Majesty. You must choose carefully. They will make a pageant of agreeing. No pageants, Thalira said. Peace requires skin. The words traveled, not only through the chamber, but down stairwells, along courtyards, through markets where vendors paused with measuring cords in their hands. On the human base, the rumor took shape with heat. The queen would choose one of them as a pledge to bind two nations. Officers laughed and called it relic law. Soldiers traded guesses. Elias did not speak. He watched the way his squad mates tried to joke and failed, the way they tightened their straps as if to remind themselves they would leave if called. He had never thought about queens, except as patterns on maps, but the idea of a single person standing in a doorway between a war and a future made his chest hurt. That night, the Valorian queen toured the infirmary without fanfare. She spoke softly to a mechanic who had lost 2 fingers saving a child from a fire on a border moon. She held the pilot's gaze until the woman ceased shaking. She pressed her palm to a newborn's cradle and closed her eyes. The palace lights dimmed an extra fraction, as if sharing her breath. When she returned to her private hall, she paused before a mirror, vast oval of fused glass that showed not only a face, but also the gravity of duty around it. She wondered what kind of human understood that gravity without collapsing. Perhaps not someone raised on podiums and negotiations. Perhaps someone who knew what it meant to choose a stranger above an order. In the morning, the summons went out across the fracture line. Delegations would meet on a neutral station, spun from the bones of an old ore ring. The ring had seen miners and smugglers and dancers. It had learned the art of making different kinds of footsteps sound like the same song. Banners were forbidden. Weapons checked. Witnesses plentiful. History needs eyes to be convinced. Elias was assigned perimeter security for the human delegation, not because anyone thought him fit for ceremony, but because there are always doors you do not see until someone opens them. He moved along the RIM corridor with a partner who admired famous uniforms and pointed discreetly when admirals passed. A child, lifted onto a parent's hip for a better view, waved a paper flag she had been told was not allowed. Elias smiled at her and tucked the paper away gently. "Keep it for home," he said, "where flags are safe." When the Valorian party arrived, the station's air changed. They were tall, yes, but the height was less surprising than the stillness. It was like seeing a cliff walk. Impossible until you remember stone has patience. Thalira moved at their center. Nothing about her asked forgiveness. Nothing about her took more space than necessary. She wore a narrow band at her brow, dull silver, the color of rain on a blade. They met in a circular hall open to starlight on one side. The hum of generators became a kind of low drum. A human envoy read a statement that had been polished by lawyers until it left no fingerprints. A Valorian elder recited the lineage of the treaty, names rolling like tide. Thalira lifted her hand. The hall inhaled. "To end a war," she said, "someone must place their life in the middle of it, and refused to move. Her eyes moved over the human delegation. Admirals lifted their chins. Envoys arranged their expressions into agreeable shapes. A few officers stood at respectful attention. Farther back, just at the edge of the assembly's light, a soldier paused in his patrol to watch, attentive without hope of being seen. He had steady hands and the kind of gaze that counted exits for other people. Thalira felt the room tilt toward expectation, toward the safe choice, the ceremonial one. She thought of the mechanic's missing fingers. She thought of music that rose like smoke. She thought, unbidden, of a doorway with a human body braced across it. The opal lines at her temples warmed. "I invoke the War Bride Treaty," she said, voice carrying like a blade's clean note. "And I choose," whispers lifted like birds, wings beating against the station's thin air, as the Queen's gaze drifted past the polished ranks and came to rest on a single, unlikely soldier whose name no proclamation had ever spoken. The station was still murmuring with disbelief when dawn on the orbital ring bled through its panels, tinting steel corridors in soft amber. The echo of the Queen's choice carried like a low hum through every deck. Soldiers traded glances. Officers whispered. Aides hurried to check protocols that had not been used in generations. Some laughed in disbelief. Some bristled. None of them could quite explain why the Queen of Valor, whose word could launch a fleet, had named a man with no rank to speak of. Elias Ward had not moved for several seconds after hearing his name. His partner nudged him, half joking, half terrified. When he finally stepped forward, the sound of his boots against the polished floor seemed impossibly loud. The eyes of admirals, elders, dignitaries tracked him like targeting beams. He could feel the weight of titles on their shoulders, the weight of expectation that he did not carry. He was just a soldier who knew how to get people out of burning rooms, thalira. Valis watched him cross the hall with the unbroken calm of a woman who had measured every path before taking it. To the council, she offered no explanation. To Elias, she offered nothing more than a steady, assessing gaze. Yet something passed in that momentary acknowledgement of courage that was not loud, of choices that came not from politics, but from the quiet insistence on protecting life. The following hours were a blur. Forms were signed, statements were released, and the story raced through channels faster than any fleet. The Queen chooses a foot soldier, read the tags. Commentators speculated about secret agendas, propaganda, or insult. Human diplomats scrambled to frame it as an honor. Valorian elders debated whether their queen had risked everything on sentiment. Only Elias knew how strange it felt to stand still while two worlds argued around him. When the delegation prepared to return, Elias was summoned by a voice like tempered steel. "Ward," his commander said, trying to hide the knot in his throat. "Orders say you are to accompany the Valorian envoy. You will not return until treaty terms are fulfilled." It might have been farewell, but the man could not quite say it. Elias nodded once and went to pack, though there was nothing to pack, except a few worn clothes, his field knife, and a picture of his sister's children folded small enough to hide in his palm. The Valorian ship was unlike any human craft. It curved rather than angled, and it moved like it had no interest in speed, only inevitability. The corridors were high and quiet, lit by threads of blue that pulsed faintly with the ship's heart. Every soldier who passed looked at him like one might look at a question they did not know how to answer. Thalira did not greet him at first. She remained in the command hall, flanked by counselors who spoke softly and moved like parts of a machine. Yet Elias felt her presence everywhere, like gravity, not always visible, but impossible to ignore. At night, or what passed for night, in a ship that lived by its own clock, he walked the empty decks and watched the stars swing across the viewports. Some of them belonged to maps he knew. Most did not. On the third cycle, a summons came. A tall guard led him into a chamber with windows like open sky. Thalira stood alone, no crown, no armor, just a narrow band at her brow and a cloak that caught. the glow of the stars. Her expression was calm, but her voice carried an edge sharpened by expectation. "You are far from home," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Elias answered, because ma'am was the only title he knew how to use without sounding like a fool. "You do not ask why. Would it change the answer?" Her mouth curved almost imperceptibly. "Most men would beg for reason. Most men are smarter than me," he said. "I just figured you saw something I didn't." That earned silence, but not the cold kind. She studied him, her eyes narrowing as if weighing not only his words, but the way he held his ground, despite the distance between their worlds. "You broke orders to save children," she said finally. "You carried strangers through fire. When you could have taken credit, you stayed quiet. These are not qualities our courts understand well." Elias shifted his weight. "I'm no symbol, Your Majesty. I just do the work in front of me, and yet," she said, moving closer, "you are one now, whether you wanted it or not." Their gazes locked, and for the first time he saw not only the queen, but the weight she carried. There was steel there, yes, but also something quieter and exhaustion kept well hidden, a loneliness wrapped in protocol. It unsettled him more than her rank. But the moment broke when the chamber doors hissed open. A counselor entered, face tight. "Majesty, there is movement in the outer sectors. 2 scout ships destroyed. We believe the dissident faction is stirring." Thalira's calm hardened. "Then we arrive at war not only to prevent one, but to fight shadows among our own." Her glance at Elias was brief but telling. "Stay close. You are safer in my shadow than in your own." He followed without hesitation, though he knew nothing yet of what those words truly meant. Suspicion curled in the air of the Valorian ship, alliances frayed at the edges. Somewhere beyond the glitter of stars, enemies smiled at chaos, and in the middle of it all walked a queen who trusted no counsel, and a soldier who had nothing to lose. They did not know yet what they would mean to each other. They only knew that the path ahead was narrowing, and that every step now would echo louder than any gun. The Valorian flagship drifted like a silver spear across the velvet dark, but inside it hummed with quiet tension. From the outside it was grace, but within, it was a world of watching eyes and silent judgments. Elias Ward walked those corridors as though he were a shadow that had taken the wrong turn. Soldiers twice his height, draped in silver-gray armor, passed by with stiff nods. Some ignored him completely. Others let their gazes linger, sharp and questioning. He felt the weight of every glance, but kept his pace steady. The queen had chosen him, and that was a fact neither the human command nor the Valorian council could reverse. But choice did not mean trust. At every meal, he sat at the end of a long, crystalline table, a silent guest among creatures bred for strategy and command. He learned quickly that words carried weight here. Even the smallest sentence was measured. The Valorian officers spoke little to him, but their silence was not empty. It was testing. They wanted to see if he would bend, if he would break, if he would reveal fear. When he finally saw Queen Thalira again, it was not in the grand chambers or council hall, but in the training courts. The room was vast, a circle of smooth stone under pale lights, its walls lined with weapons from a dozen ages. She stood alone at the center, cloak discarded, blade in hand. There was nothing ceremonial about her movements. She fought an opponent, of metal and code, a sparring drone taller than Elias by a head. Her strikes were measured, but fast, her posture fluid. When she turned and saw him, she did not stop. "You watch," she said, breath even, "but do you learn?" Elias folded his arms, leaning slightly against the wall. "I learn you don't need an army to win a fight." The corner of her mouth twitched. With a single spin, she disarmed the drone and let it fall to its knees. She crossed the floor, blade low, her presence filling the space. Courage without strength is a candle in the wind. Strength without courage is a locked door. "Tell me, soldier, which are you?" Elias hesitated only a moment. "Neither," I'm the one who opens doors so the candles don't go out. Something changed in her gaze then. A flicker, brief, like a shadow passing over water. She tilted her head, studying him. Your tongue is sharp for a man without rank. Be careful, words can become chains. I've had worse chains, he said simply. Before she could answer, the court doors opened. A Valorian officer entered, eyes sharp, voice taut. Majesty, council requires your presence. There are concerns. She didn't move immediately. Concerns? They say this treaty weakens the crown. Some believe your choice is an insult. There are whispers of discontent, even among the guard. Thalira's posture remained calm, but Elias saw the faintest tightening at her jaw. Let them whisper, she said. Whispers are nothing until they become wind. The officer's gaze flicked to Elias, and the human. He stays, Thalira answered, cutting off further question. Later, when she left for the council, Elias found himself walking alone through the flagship's quieter levels. Here, the hum of the engines was a low heartbeat, and the halls smelled faintly of metal and ozone. He stopped when he heard voices, two soldiers, unaware of his approach. A queen who chooses a stranger over her own kind, one said, low, but sharp. It is weakness, or strategy, said the other. She hides something. Perhaps he's a pawn, perhaps more. Elias moved on, silent, but the words stayed with him. It wasn't only suspicion he felt. It was something sharper. Someone on this ship did not want peace. That night, alarms broke the stillness. Not loud, but sharp enough to send blood running faster. Elias woke instantly, boots on, knife at his belt. The corridors glowed red in warning strips, and soldiers ran with quiet purpose. He caught a fragment of speech from one of them. Perimeter breach. Not human signatures. At the command deck, Thalira stood at the center, calm in the storm, eyes fixed on the hovering map. 3 points of light blinked at the edge of Valorian territory. They were moving fast. Dissident craft, said an officer. Unknown allegiance. No response to calls. Thalira's voice was steady, but a thread of steel ran through it. Seal the inner decks. Prepare interceptors. Then, almost as an afterthought, she turned to Elias. You wished to open doors. Today you may need to close them. The crew moved like water around her, efficient and silent. But Elias could feel the weight of something heavier than intruders. This was not just a breach. It was a message. Someone wanted to test the Queen's choice, to make her stumble, to make her doubt. And for the first time, as the ship veered toward shadowed space, Elias understood something. He was not just a witness to this story. He was already inside it. The flagship of valor became a fortress the moment the warning lights began to pulse. Red lines traced across its curved walls, sealing bulkheads with deep metallic sighs. The gentle hum of an empire's most advanced vessel shifted into a rhythm of readiness, like a heartbeat growing faster before a fight. To most aboard, this was routine drill sharpening. To Elias Ward, it was a strange music, each clang and hiss, telling him he was far from home, and closer to something no one could name yet. He followed the Queen's guards through the corridors, boots echoing on silver floors that seemed to have memory. Valorian soldiers moved with silent precision, but he caught the flicker of unease in some faces. A break in the perimeter was too rare for coincidence. The flagship's shields could bend meteors. Few would dare to test them. Whoever had sent those small craft darting toward the fleet wanted to send a message. On the command deck, the air was sharp with focus. Holograms floated like restless spirits above a round table. Blue-white points marked friendly ships. 3 red points blinked steadily at the edge of the grid. The room was lit, as if by moonlight, cold and clean, and the Queen stood at its center, unarmed but unshaken, her presence making the war table feel like a court. Report, she said, her voice not raised but carrying easily. Dissident craft, answered her tactical chief, his tone clipped. Fast. Light armament. They're not here to win a battle. They're here to be seen. Thalira's gaze swept over the room. Then they will be seen and erased. She turned, eyes landing briefly on Elias, who stood by the doors as if unsure whether to step closer. And do you believe in coincidences? Elias shook his head. Not when people want power. Good, she said simply, and turned back to her officers. Moments later, the ship trembled as interceptors launched, a low vibration running up through the deck plates. The council back on the homeworld had already sent encrypted demands. Why had the Queen left the Crown world with a human soldier? Why was the flagship now under threat? Thalira did not answer. She watched the red points divide, darting like gnats, and waited. Within minutes, one red light vanished from the grid, then another. But the third turned, fast and deliberate, skimming the flagship's outer shield like a hand brushing silk. They're scanning us, said an officer, teeth clenched. Elias leaned forward slightly, instinct pricking. That's not a scout. They're looking for something. Or someone, Thalira murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink, just a fraction. Was the attack really about the treaty? About her? Or about the strange man from a different world, now standing in her shadow? Then came the impact. A ripple through the deck, small but felt. Something hit the shields hard enough to make the lights flicker. Soldiers tensed. They left something, an analyst said. Foreign object attached to the outer hull. A pause. Then the Queen spoke. Bring it aboard. The officers stiffened, but no one argued. Moments later, the drone-like object was carried into an auxiliary bay, sealed behind 2 layers of containment fields. It looked harmless smooth, silver, no bigger than a man's head. But the Valorian technicians kept their hands steady, and their faces guarded. Thalira walked to the edge of the containment field, Elias a step behind. He could see the faint glow of etching on its surface, shapes that might have been letters, or simply noise. Then, as the technicians prepared to probe it, the glow sharpened into symbols. It was not Valorian. It was not human. What does it say? Elias asked. The Queen tilted her head, studying the light. It says we are not alone in this war. The room grew still. The object pulsed once, softly, like a heartbeat, and then fell quiet. In the hours that followed, tension coiled tighter. The object was moved to the deepest vault of the ship. The council demanded answers. The crew moved with cautious respect. Elias found himself watching the Queen more closely, sensing shifts too subtle for the others. She was calm, but there was a new edge in her quiet moments, like a musician holding a note too long. Later, when the flagship settled into silent patrol, she sent for him. They met in a private observation deck, an arc of glass showing an ocean of stars. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the ship and the faint breath of the woman who carried the burden of peace. They are watching us, she said without preamble. Not just my enemies, or yours. Someone else. Something else. Elias studied her profile, the lines of command softened by starlight. You think the treaty made you a target? I think peace is always a target, she replied. But perhaps it is not only my council that fears it. There are old forces in this galaxy, and they do not care for the courage of small things. She turned then, facing him fully. Her height still dwarfed him, but in that moment there was no distance, only a shared quiet that felt dangerous and necessary. You are not ready for what is coming, she said softly, but I may have chosen you because no one ever truly. As her words carried weight, but also something else, a trace of trust not yet spoken. Elias wanted to reply, but the deck trembled faintly under his feet. A reminder that even the calmest moment can be broken, and far away, in the cold, something moved. The ship did not sleep after the strange drone was sealed away. Even when the flagship settled back into patrol routes, there was a quiet that felt too sharp, like the pause before a storm. Valorian soldiers moved with greater vigilance, their weapons carried at angles of readiness. Human news feeds buzzed with speculation about the treaty, but Elias Ward knew something heavier was breathing around them. That little silver object had carried more than strange light. It had carried a promise that someone else was watching. Elias was kept close to the Queen now, though no one said it directly. The council had demanded reports. The officers kept their distance, and every whisper seemed to have his name folded inside it. Some called him the foreign token, others the gamble, but none could explain why a simple soldier was at the center of a treaty shaking two empires. And though he pretended to ignore it, Elias felt the pressure too. He knew weapons. He knew courage, but politics, they were a language he didn't speak. Yet Thalira Valis did. She spoke it as if it were her second breath. When the council signaled its unease with coded messages, she read them without changing expression. When her officers hinted at doubt, she cut them off with the same cool patience she used to steady a blade. To Elias, she seemed untouchable. But then there were moments, rare and quiet, when the weight of her choices showed in the smallest ways. An extra pause at the end of a meeting, a hand resting longer than needed on a railing, a glance toward him that lingered as if she were measuring something more than duty. The fifth night after the breach, the Queen summoned him not to the command deck or council chamber, but to a wing he had never seen. The corridors here were darker, quieter, lined with smooth walls that seemed to hum faintly. They stopped at a door that opened only for her hand. Inside, the room was simple: an oval table, dim lights, and a single window that opened to the stars. "This is not ceremony," she said, her voice even but softer than he had heard it before. "This is where I go when I must think without noise. And tonight, I need answers." Elias shifted, unsure. Answers about what? She studied him. Why you? That is the question my people will never stop asking. And you must know I do not believe in randomness. You chose me, he said carefully. Maybe that's the only reason I have. Her gaze was steady. No, I chose you because a soldier who defies orders for strangers will also defy fear. But you need to understand what that means now. The treaty has not stopped our enemies. It has painted a target on us both. There are factions in my court who believe you are an insult. There are factions in yours who believe I cannot be trusted. And now? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Now, we have proof of something worse. That Dronit was neither Valorian nor human. Someone else is interested in this union. Someone who benefits if peace fails. The silence that followed seemed to hum with the weight of that truth. Elias looked at her, seeing the line of tension in her jaw. So what do you need me to do? She turned toward the window, the starlight soft against her profile. Stay alive. Watch everything. Speak to no one about what you see. You are my choice, Elias Ward, and they will try to use that against me. Let them, but we must be ready. It might have ended there, but the ship decided otherwise. The alarm broke, the quiet like glass, a single, sharp note that meant only one thing: intrusion. They moved quickly, almost running through the twisting halls. The command deck was alive with movement, voices tight, screens full of shifting points. A small transport had docked without authorization. No explosion, no direct attack, just a shadow that slipped in through the cracks. Seal the lower decks, Thalira ordered. Her calm was unbroken, but her pace quickened. If this is the faction, they want fear more than blood. Elias followed, the knife at his belt now heavy, his senses sharp. They reached a narrow service corridor lit by strips of pale light. 2 guards waited outside a sealed hatch. One spoke quickly, tension in every word. Motion detected inside. Majesty. No heat signatures. Could be automated. Could be a decoy. Or could be worse, Elias muttered. The Queen glanced at him, and in that flicker, he saw something surprising. Not just command, but trust. With me, she said. They opened the hatch. Inside, the space was tight and lined with storage crates. It smelled faintly of oil and something older, like burned metal. At first it seemed empty. Then Elias saw it, a faint shimmer at the far wall, like light bending. The shimmer moved. He barely had time to shout before something launched forward a small device, quick and silent, scattering sparks. He tackled the queen out of its path, the thing shattering against the crates with a hiss. Smoke curled, acrid and sharp, and from it a dozen thin rods spilled, each one etched with markings no one recognized. When the air cleared, they saw the message scrawled across the floor where the device had burned it in black. The treaty must fail. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Thalira straightened, her cloak settling like calm after thunder. They think fear will turn us aside, she said softly, but fear is only a tool. She looked down at Elias, who was still catching his breath. You are not here by chance, soldier. You are here because they will never expect you, and that is our greatest advantage. Outside the chamber, the flagship hummed as if listening. Somewhere, enemies waited, unknown and patient. But inside, a quiet partnership was forming, tested by fire, unspoken but undeniable. The flagship sailed deeper into Valorian space, but there was no relief. The halls that once carried an almost sacred stillness now held whispers, quick glances, and steps that moved faster than before. The drone, the silent message burned into the floor, the treaty must fail, had turned a historic journey into a hunt for shadows. And somewhere amid the corridors of steel and light, Elias Ward could feel that unseen hunt tightening its net. The council's coded transmissions grew sharper. Demands for answers became accusations cloaked in formality. Why was the queen risking everything for a treaty with humans? Why had she chosen a man with no title, no bloodline? Was he her weakness or her secret weapon? Rumors swirled. Some believed Elias was a spy. Others whispered he was a pawn of something larger. None of them knew that he too was searching for answers, listening to murmurs, watching the pattern of guards change, noticing where silence seemed too heavy. Thalira, Valis wore her calm like armor. In public she was unshaken, her stride cutting through doubt like a blade through water. But Elias had begun to see her more closely. When she read the council's messages alone, her jaw tightened ever so slightly. When she studied the strange rods recovered from the intruder device, her fingers traced the markings as though she was trying to hear something only she could feel. One night, when most of the ship slept, she summoned him again, not to the council rooms, but to the secure archives buried deep within the flagship. They moved without escorts this time, their footsteps echoing down a narrow spine of metal that felt older than the rest of the vessel. Doors opened only at her touch, and each door seemed thicker than the last. Inside the archives, the walls were lined with black glass panels, lit by faint blue veins. Here were the records of an empire, battles fought, treaties broken, secrets buried so deep they were almost mythed. And there, under a low light, lay the rods retrieved from the attack. They were small, metallic, cold to the touch, and covered in marks that looked like writing, but shifted when you stared too long. They are not ours, Thalira said, almost to herself. And they are not yours. Elias leaned closer, frowning. Then whose? An enemy that prefers silence over armies, she said, her tone lower than usual. We fought them once, long before your people walked among the stars. We thought them gone. Perhaps we were wrong. Her words carried weight beyond the rods. They carried the suggestion of something larger, something ancient, moving again. Elias felt the room grow smaller, not from the walls, but from the sense that the map of danger had just widened. Why tell me this? He asked finally. She met his eyes. Because you are not like my officers. They see duty. You see people. When the ground shifts, it will not be strategy that saves us, it will be trust. and I need someone who can act before the council debates." Before Elias could reply, the ship shuddered just once, but enough to set the panels quivering. The alarm that followed was not sharp but low, almost like a warning sigh. A voice came through the walls. "Hull breach on deck 14. Intrusion confirmed. Unknown signatures." They ran. Guards fell into step behind them, weapons drawn, but Thalira moved like a streak of silver, her cloak cutting the air. Elias followed close, his heart already in combat rhythm. Deck 14 was a maintenance level, narrow and dim, and as they arrived, the smell of scorched metal hit them like a wave. Half a corridor was sealed by emergency shields. Beyond it, the floor was torn and blackened, a service hatch ripped apart from the inside. Valorian soldiers were crouched, weapons ready, but the thing they were aiming at was Gano bodies. No debris, just the echo of movement. They were here, a guard said, fast, like they knew the ship. Something else caught Elias's eye, on the wall, half hidden in the soot. Another message, smaller this time, but no less chilling. "Your crown will fall." It was written in the same strange shifting marks as the rods. Back in the command center, chaos simmered under quiet control. Reports came in, faint signals on the edge of sensors, too faint to trace. The council demanded the ship return to the capital world. Thalira refused. Her orders were crisp: lock down every level, increase patrols, and scan every system. But Elias saw the slight shadow of thought behind her command. This was no simple rebellion. Something was probing them, learning their weaknesses, and using fear like a blade. That night, guards doubled their posts. The Queen remained on the command deck, standing before a wide screen that showed stars slipping by. Elias stayed near, silent, watchful. "You are quiet," she said, without turning. "I'm thinking," he answered. "Of what?" "That maybe whoever's behind this doesn't care about the treaty. Maybe they care about you." Her head turned, slightly, enough for him to see her profile against the glow. "Then they will learn what a crown is worth." She faced forward again, but her hand rested briefly on the console. The light catching the faintest tremor, barely there, gone in a second. Elias filed it away. Not as weakness, but as something rarer. A reminder that even steel can feel the weight of the sky. And far away, beyond the reach of any fleet, something moved again in the dark. The flagship did not slow as it cut through. The black by now its decks were taut with tension. Every corridor guarded, every system under constant sweep. The message on the wall, "Your crown will fall," had settled like a shadow over the crew. Some feared open rebellion, others whispered of enemies who had never shown their face. But the Queen walked those halls calm as ever, her silver cloak cutting through suspicion like a calm blade. Elias Ward, the soldier no one expected, moved quietly behind her, eyes sharp, listening more than he spoke. The council grew louder with each passing hour. Messages arrived from the homeworld demanding her return, warning that the treaty risked destabilizing their rule. One voice suggested, half hidden by coded phrases, that the Queen step down for the sake of unity. Thalira read each line, without a change of expression. But Elias could see something stirring behind her composure. When the next intrusion came, it was not metal or message, it was silence. The ship's sensors went dark for 3 breaths, long enough for every soldier to reach for a weapon. When the lights returned, a single object floated outside the observation glass. Tethered to nothing, a sphere of shifting metal, symbols crawling over its surface. "Majesty," the tactical chief said, voice tight, "we cannot trace its signal. It's broadcasting something." "Open a secure channel," Thalira ordered. The symbols twisted into light. The room fell still as a voice emerged, not spoken but felt, cold and calm. "Your union will fail. Your worlds will burn if they stand together." It ended as suddenly as it began. The sphere dissolved, scattering fragments into the void. Elias stepped closer. This isn't just your people or mine, is it? No, she said. This is something older. They fear not war, but peace. They fear what two worlds could build. The council's demands reached a breaking point that night. A secure transmission came directly to the flagship's private chamber. Elias was not supposed to be there, but thalira motioned for him to stay. The faces of the elders filled the screen lines of rank and doubt. You endanger the throne, one said. This treaty was a risk. Your choice of consort was reckless. Now enemies strike at our heart. Return at once, or we will vote to remove your command. Thalira did not raise her voice. You mistake a storm for weakness. You do not see that. The sky has changed. If we fight each other now, we will be blind when the true hand moves against us. Then explain your choice, another elder demanded. Why this human? Why make our people question your judgment? The queen's gaze flicked briefly to Elias, then back to them. Because he does not look at me and see a crown, he sees the door I must hold open for both our worlds. He will guard it, because no one expects him to. And because peace cannot be forged by ceremony, it must be carried by those who remember what lives cost. The screen went dark. No decision yet. But the threat hung there. It was hours later, with the ship running silent, when the attack came. Small craft darted from the shadows, fast and precise, striking at the flagship's shields. The decks shook, alarms bled into the quiet. Thalira was already moving. Interceptors launch. Seal the archives. Keep the bridge locked. But Elias was moving to something, in the pattern of the attacks, was wrong. They weren't trying to destroy, they were trying to breach. He followed the echo of movement down to the lower decks, where lights flickered, and the smell of burned metal hit hard, in a storage bay. They found it, a small team of intruders, humanoid but armored in shifting plates, carving into the ship's systems. The guards opened fire. The air crackled with energy, but the intruders were fast. One broke off and rushed for a hidden console. Elias moved without thinking. He slammed into the attacker, blade flashing, the fight short and rough. By the time the smoke cleared, the intruders were down, but not before one of them had left a final mark, another message scorched into the wall. She must fall before the vow is sealed. When the bay was secured, the queen stepped into the smoke. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharper than steel. She looked at Elias, who still stood, breathing hard. The weapon blackened in his hand. You bleed for people not your own, she said softly, and still you do not ask for reward. That is why they fear us, because they cannot understand a bond that is chosen, not forced. The treaty ceremony was brought forward. The council could no longer argue, not after the attacks, not after the proof that someone else wanted to see them divided. They gathered in the grand hall of the capital, a place of white stone and high windows, banners stilled in heavy air. There was no music, only the echo of steps. When the moment came, Thalira stood before her people and the human delegation. Elias Ward, the soldier once nameless, stood at her side, plain uniform against her silver. They wanted us to fight, she said to the hall, her voice steady. They wanted us to believe that difference is weakness. But this man showed me that courage wears no crown. Today, valor stands not alone. Today we seal a promise with hands ungloved, with trust unhidden. She took his hand, high and clear, not as ceremony, but as defiance. The hall erupted, some in shock, some in pride, some in fear, but the choice was made. The treaty was signed. The attacks stopped that day. Not because the enemies were gone, but because they were watching. And somewhere in the quiet after the cheers faded, Elias turned to Thalira and said, half smiling, "You could have chosen anyone." "I did," she said simply. "And that is why they will never see us coming." The story of the War Bride Treaty spread across stars, told in voices hushed and voices proud. And though the council would still argue, and enemies would still whisper, the image of a queen and a soldier walking side by side became something larger than war, a reminder that even the smallest hand can steady a crown.